after something close to 25 years now, we have a follow-up to Ridley Scott's massive Roman epic Gladiator with Gladiator 2. And I really want to talk about how does this thing hold up, and is this a film that deserves to be a sequel to such a massively acclaimed film? Let's get into it. So firstly, let's talk about Ridley Scott. The man that made Gladiator has made so many classics and has had a run lately where he has drawn up a lot of divisive films and a lot of films that people just outright despise. And people wonder with Gladiator 2 if he's a director that still has it and can somehow draw out that magic again. I'm someone who has been a bit of a defender of his work. Last year I was flamed a little bit for my take on Napoleon, for liking but not loving that movie, and that is purely because he still works within a genre that we just don't see often, and to see a big budget historical epic on the level of something like Gladiator 2 come out in 2024 is very special to me, and it's something that I like seeing on the screen, so I'm a little bit more forgiving of some of the film's shortcomings in his previous work. This is a little bit different because it needs to be held to a different standard, because the first Gladiator is something that was a landmark film. It won Best Picture, had so much both critical acclaim as well as this huge fan reception, and became a classic pretty quickly. And for me, I'm so pleased to report that Gladiator 2 was such a fantastic time in the theater. This film, the way that it recreates Rome in its heyday, is something so stunning to me. Yes, I'm one of those men that think about the Roman Empire daily. It's something that I have read so much about and am inherently drawn into the way that society was built through the Roman Empire and a lot of the things that happened during those times. These events go a little bit further on from a lot of the stuff that I would read about, but it's still in a time where Rome is this prosperous nation that is slowly starting to crumble and head to that fall of Rome. And I think for me, the first thing I want to talk about is actually the production design, because it is honestly probably my favorite production design of the year, and the way that it integrates with visual effects as well is quite seamless. You can't really tell what has been built and what has been digitally altered through CGI. Yes, there is some questionable CGI, but I found that to be more in the animals rather than the backdrops and enhancing the production design. As a whole, there are these wide shots of the Roman Empire, of the Colosseum, and you just see how grand and how much power was in that nation during that time when they were the superpower of the world and driving forward culture and society and a lot of the things that we base ourselves on, and a lot of the structures that we have now. You could go back to the Roman Empire as one of those initial steps to making that kind of progress, and I think Ridley Scott does do a pretty good job of illustrating a lot of that without putting it at the forefront of the narrative, and I thought that was quite clever the way it was handled. And yes, we're not even getting into the main source of the narrative, but this surrounding element to the film gives it a lot of atmosphere and gives it a world that feels lived in, that feels like it was this massive superpower transporting you back to that time. I absolutely love that, and it's so cool to see a film focus on rebuilding some of the amazing stories that we have in our history rather than rely on some IP. I think that is always the way to go forward for me, because I find those stories much more fascinating. There's a lot of complexity there and so much to dive into. And first and foremost, I must praise Gladiator 2 for not only attempting to do that, but exceeding all of my wildest expectations in bringing that to life. And then you have the narrative itself. So this film follows Paul Mescal, who has some ties to the events of the first Gladiator, which it unveils in some pretty interesting ways, and more or less feels like a revenge movie for a good portion of it. and then it becomes something much more grander in scope and scale as it starts focusing on the political divide of the Roman Empire and the way that people would scheme to get power. All of these different elements, and when they start weaving their way into this narrative, becomes a lot more interesting than just a straightforward revenge narrative. But even so, when it is carrying forward that revenge narrative, I thought it was fantastic in its execution. Paul Mescal is a fantastic actor, and it's awesome to see him in a role like this, and he excels here. I wouldn't say he's on the level of Russell Crowe in drawing out that iconic kind of performance, but it is definitely excellent. And I think where Gladiator 2 might even be better than the first Gladiator is its supporting cast. I mean, the first one definitely had a great supporting cast, but I think I might prefer this one overall. I mean, you firstly have the two emperors that are comically evil. They're very one note for sure, but they don't need to be anything more than that. Just these spoiled brats that you love to hate. And I think Ridley Scott does a fantastic job of illustrating that in that film and using that as a device that becomes more important for some of the more grander revelations that the film wants to present that I think are far more interesting. Then you have Pedro Pascal, who is a character that I thought was quite smartly written in terms of the way that we perceive him through the eyes of Paul Mescal versus how the Roman Empire perceives him, and seeing his story, because it puts you in that character's shoes for a few scenes, it gives you a broader understanding of the character and why he does certain things. And I think the way that us as an audience looks at that character as we get to certain moments, it completely evolves and changes, and once again is just smart direction and writing. And Pedro Pascal toes that line really well. I thought in the battle scenes he really showcased himself as this massive leader that everyone respects and follows. I thought he worked so well within the role, and I think there is a lot to do with the scale of the thing. The costumes and production design probably make it so immersive for an actor to dive into these roles, because a lot of this setting has been built out for them, where it is easier for them to dive into these roles. And I really think that is a driving factor here. And now we have to talk about Denzel Washington. He's the only one in this cast that is getting some kind of Oscar buzz, and I get it after seeing this movie. He's Denzel Washington. What more do you need me to fucking say? He is a phenomenal actor, one of the greatest of all time. And yeah, he is fantastic in this movie. I love when he does these more Shakespearean kind of characters, in a sense. He did that with the tragedy of Macbeth, and I do think that is my favorite performance from him. And then what he delivers here is so interesting. The way that this character schemes and changes and is willing to turn on someone on a dime while being this quite intelligent individual. I definitely consider him to be somewhat similar to Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, the way that he behaves and the way he schemes and tries to gain power, not through force but through his words and manipulation. The way that Denzel Washington is able to play off this character, play kind of a lot of different characters, because this person is scheming and is a chameleon and molds himself to different conversations and different people. The way that Denzel is able to navigate that showcased his range as an actor and why he is one of the greatest of all time. I think in terms of its narrative, I think this film is pretty entertaining for the most part. You could consider it to be something like a popcorn flick, just a big blockbuster popcorn flick, but a really good one. That is kind of how I see it. There are moments that are sure pretty predictable. There are moments as well that play on a little bit of nostalgia bait, and I understand that this is a sequel and we're following up the first one, but there are more clever ways of linking these stories together rather than utilizing some member berries nostalgia bait that did feel a little lazy to me and was one of the key criticisms that I have towards the film. I just thought those elements could have been done a lot better than what they were, and felt like it was cutting corners a little bit. But this has so much entertainment value. There's plenty of battles in the Colosseum. I mean, there's this one with these naval battles, with sharks everywhere. I mean, it's just crazy. It's pure entertainment value. And there is debates whether something like that is historically accurate. And I'm gonna just be frank with you. When I'm watching a film, as long as you're somewhat resembling what those times were, you can be a little bit fantastical. I don't give a shit. If I want a real recollection of everything that happened during that time, I would read a book, read something off the internet from reliable sources, or watch a documentary. I'm watching a movie to be entertained, to be pulled into this world, to have a good time. So yes, if it plays a little bit fast and loose with history, I don't mind that at all. And when we're talking about the Roman Empire, I have done both, and I do know a lot about that kind of history. So when I'm watching the movie and I do see some historical inaccuracies, I don't really give a shit, if I'm being honest. But I'm going to tell you right now, if that is something that triggers you, and I know that triggers a lot of people, then you're going to get annoyed by some of this as it gets a little bit crazy and tries to have a lot of fun. But please just go into this. It's a movie. It's not a documentary. It's not here to inform you. It's just here to bring to life what the Roman Empire looked like, showcase this portion of history. And I think these movies are important for you to find the truth yourself. If you're really compelled by a movie like this and have such a great time with it, you're going to be compelled to read about it afterwards and read about the real history. And that is what these movies being so entertaining can do. And Gladiator 2, I think, is one of those kinds of movies to me. Technically, the film is pretty brilliant. I mean, as I said already, the production design and costume design is just next level. Some of my favorite of the year. Cinematography is absolutely gorgeous to me. It is on the scale of the first one in terms of how cinematic it feels and looks. The sound is phenomenal. Yes, as I mentioned, there are some questionable moments with the CGI, definitely with some of the animals. There was a scene with monkeys that I thought looked a little bit patchy, but come on, we're really just grasping at straws here. There's not much here that I was truly bothered by apart from some of the nostalgia bait. And you could say there are some questions that the film leaves you on as it ends, and it makes me wonder if they're going to make a third one. I have heard rumors that Ridley Scott might be interested in making a third, and I don't know, I'm happy if it becomes a trilogy, but I also don't want it to become a Godfather 3 situation where it just completely loses the plot and forgets a little bit what made it so special. But honestly, the first one and the second one are fantastic, and this might be a hot take, but I think I might actually prefer the second one over the first one. They're both phenomenal movies, and it is hard to pick one that is truly better. But for me, I think the second one is just a lot more entertaining, while combining these historical elements, being so grand, and at times being quite clever with what it's doing, that I just was on board for the ride this whole time. And seeing a movie like this that is so well crafted, while being focused on his history and these fascinating stories, is something that I'm going to support all the time. Those are the types of movies that really compel me to go to the theater. And I'm honestly so glad that this movie exists. This isn't Ridley Scott's best film, like he has been saying. That is a little bit of a director hyping up his own movie before it releases. But I do think it actually is one of his best movies. It is phenomenal, and I highly recommend you check it out. These are the types of movies that we need. And as a score, I'm going to give Gladiator 2 a fairly strong 4.5 out of 5, because yes, this movie is excellent. And those are my thoughts towards Gladiator 2. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.